Welcome, everyone. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Great to have you joining us. My name is Sophia. I'm the Director of Organizational Partnerships at Hello Alice, which is a social venture that supports small business owners and entrepreneurs and is a very proud partner of StartOut. I'm excited to be your moderator for this awesome panel today. So welcome. We're going to be talking about trends in entrepreneurship and LGBTQ entrepreneurship. I want to just quickly thank StartOut for hosting this. Really awesome to get such great minds together, and excited. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think this topic is really important. So excited to dig in with you. Before I do, want to introduce you to our awesome panelists. And I'll just flag for our panelists too, Ari, and if you could add your pronouns as well, that'd be great. And I'll start by introducing Dr. Nee Cordolai, Senior Advisor and National LGBT Liaison with the AARP. Nee, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Sophia, and good afternoon, everybody. Really excited to be here. I apologize in advance. I have another panel right after this, and so I may have to leave at the top of the hour, but I'm really pleased to be here to share some trends that we're seeing here at AARP, especially as we all think about what a full recovery looks like from this pandemic. We're still in the midst of a pandemic, but I think the recovery offers us some really tremendous opportunities to recover with a heightened consciousness around diversity, equity, and inclusion in every sector of our economy.
Thanks, Nee. Great to have you. I'll move on to introducing Paolo, who's the co-founder and chief scientist at Illyria. Paolo, would you mind coming off mute and sharing a little bit about yourself with the group?
It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here. I've been a fan of StartOut for a long time. I work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I've been doing that for about 6 years. Came into it from a kind of a unique angle, analytic angle, and I work across actually 3 entities: Illyria, which is a small for-profit startup, and then ARC, which is a nonprofit, and I'm also involved with the NYU Office of Global Inclusion, as well as the Stern Business School. So it's a real pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thanks, Paolo. Great to have you. And last but definitely not least, love to introduce Ari, Senior Business Development Manager with Amazon Web Services. Ari, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sophia. Hi, folks. Ari Kalfayan here. I'm with Amazon Web Services, specifically focused on business development for artificial intelligence and machine learning. So as you can imagine, a lot of things are breaking and getting fixed with the advent of AI/ML. 10-time entrepreneur, serial entrepreneurial. First company sold for 300 million. Current company just raised another 130 million, valued at $1 billion. Company I was at before AWS. And here really to serve entrepreneurs and LGBT entrepreneurs. So excited to jump in the conversation of the future of entrepreneurship. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, we're going to dig in, but just a couple housekeeping items before we do. The first is just that, as was just put in the chat, there's going to be a Q&A towards the end of the session. So if you have questions, burning questions for us, please write them down, include them in the Q&A function, or put them in the chat, or just hold them close to you until we open it up to questions. I think you guys will have lots of great questions for our panelists, maybe some better than mine. So keep that in mind. And also just a reminder that this is meant to be a safe space for all involved. So we ask that you respect each other and our speakers with the way that you interact and the questions that you ask. So just a disclaimer there. So with that in mind, let's dig in. So, as we all have experienced, the COVID-19 pandemic has had, unprecedented effects on LGBTQ plus businesses, as well as, all forms of small businesses. I'm eager to talk to you about, what queer small business owners and entrepreneurs' needs are, and how we can work together to ensure, an equitable and vibrant future for all of them. Curious to the group, one question that I have is, outside of remote work, which is obviously a hot topic, something that's been, talked about ad nauseum, what have been some of the other biggest pivots you've seen or experienced during the pandemic with entrepreneurs that you're working with or talking with? or what did you do personally to pivot your work? How did you manage?
Go ahead.
No, go for it. Go for
it. So I was just going to say, I think one of the biggest pivots that we've seen at AARP is investments in digital transformation and the digital infrastructure of organizations. And I think it's created a unique opportunity for digital natives and for folks developing products and services in that space. We experimented with this concept of sort of, AARP friendly voice, where we used sort of a digital platform to facilitate some kind of mutual aid phone calls to older adults, who are experiencing social isolation, which, research has shown that that's the equivalent of sort of the modern day, sort of smoking. And so, we've seen a lot of investment in digital. We're still in a virtual holding pattern during this pandemic. We have not got the green light, to show up in community in person the way that we used to. At first, was a bit strange to us, but now, we've actually been leaning into opportunities to think about our digital engagement differently, thinking about our digital offerings to our 38 million members differently. And so I would say that's probably been the hard pivot that we've done during the pandemic that I think has fundamentally made us a better organization, a more responsive organization, and really has strengthened the skill set of older adults that are members of AARP.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think something that this kind of movement, even that's quickened during the pandemic to using, tech tools to communicate with one another that I've seen happen is that there's, it's a great equalizer in some ways. Everyone's working with the same tools. There's jobs that are available to entrepreneurs and resources available to entrepreneurs that might, previously been location specific, but it's also creating a world where everyone's kind of a small fish in a big pond. There's less and less opportunities to be a big fish in a small pond. And so we've seen that play out with some of our owners. Ari, I'd be curious to hear what you had to say.
Yeah, it's really interesting because on one hand, I come from an entrepreneurial background, right? On the other hand, now I work for one of the biggest companies in the world, and I support early stage startups and founders specifically in building their companies. And one thing I hear from those founders is, I've never met my investors in person. I haven't met my customers in person. There's this big gap. And coming from the early days of Weights and Biases 4 or 5 years ago, we were meeting everyone in person. We were literally trying to get in front of them wherever they are in the world. We flew to Japan for 2 days and then flew back to go meet with Toyota. So that is something that just takes some getting used to. But I think there's also the side of the pandemic that most people aren't talking about, which is depression, substance abuse, real isolation that entrepreneurs are feeling in the marketplace. And one thing I've gotten to, especially with vaccinated founders, is just meeting up in person. Creating ways to work together, inviting people to work for a week in one place. I think I've seen that happen during the pandemic, where teams would get tested and go work for a couple weeks at a time together in a remote location. And I think that trend's going to continue. And I think some organizations, especially accelerators, incubators, have gone fully digital, like Y Combinator. And I think there are others that are differentiating themselves and saying, we want to have that human connection and serendipity that comes from actually meeting up in person. I think one way I've dealt with it is just being a little silly, because it's just so boring to be on Zoom calls. Just take fun hats and things that people can laugh at and enjoy, and just bring a smile to people's faces, because we're all stuck in this together right now.
I feel less prepared, Ari. I'm suddenly looking around, what do I have to spice this up? It's a good tip. Paolo, would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, actually, I was going to echo a lot of the same things that Ari mentioned, which is that for me, I can say personally, the ability to do things remotely has been life-changing, not just in terms of remote work, but in terms of the very specific things that we do. And in particular, one thing that was surprising is that I want to say we on the for-profit side, we have come up with this very interesting way of measuring inclusion. And the way they were doing it was a bit like design thinking workshops where we had people with, sticky notes, etc. And it required a lot of confidence and trust that you could share ideas in an environment with other people. When we had to switch online, what we realized is that A, we can capture much richer data, and B, people are completely anonymous. And so we found ourselves in a way being able to get much deeper and much more clear data. So there was an example where just the having to be more digital. So in a way, also what Nee was talking about, right? It's a push toward digital, and it's the, no longer need to go be in a physical location, which, yes, I agree with Ari. Sometimes I miss that and I wish that I was doing that, but I'll tell you, not having to do those, I've done the 2-day to Japan and back, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I've done the get up at 5 a.m, fly to Detroit, give a workshop, turn around, kayak at 11 o'clock at night, and it's just so wonderful not to have to do that.
Oh yeah, brutal. I mean, I'm not saying I want to do it, by the way, but there is something you get out of actually meeting someone in person, and some of the stories that you get to by actually like connecting to people and relating to them, you might not get on a Zoom call, especially when you're Zoom fatigued.
Yeah, well, hopefully we're not too Zoom fatigued on this particular call, but yeah, it's a great point. There is that kind of intangible thing that you miss in terms of collaborating, particularly with entrepreneurs who are building a product or a service or something from the ground up that you get from being in person. Curious to the group, where do you see specific industries, maybe ones that you're most involved in, going in as we look at 2022 fast approaching, which is crazy that it's so close to being around the corner. And how does the LGBTQ plus market impact those industries movements that you've been observing?
I think we're only just beginning to scratch the surface in terms of the LGBTQ market. I always like to say, no data, no justice, right? And to the extent that we don't have data available on LGBTQ folks, and LGBTQ folks through an intergenerational lens, I would contend, then it's hard to develop the kind of products and services that meet the demand in the marketplace. And so, for example, we know that the demand for support and services for family caregivers is growing. Generally speaking, people are living longer, and families are having to sort of figure that out. Your typical caregiver, starts off at around the age of 49. Well, we know because of our research that we'll be releasing soon, so this is a sort of a sneak preview, that for LGBTQ older folks, the average age of a caregiver is 42 and a half. And so, we're starting to caregive mostly for our family members sooner in life. And so for folks in the industry that are developing products and services, not only should they be collecting LGBTQ data because, we're a part of the communities that they serve in general, but there's also, a huge business opportunity, specifically as it relates to family caregivers in the United States.
Yeah, that's a great point. Go ahead, Ari.
Paolo, why don't you go? I'll go next.
I guess you saw it's like in Jeopardy. It's like, who clicks that unmute button first? No, I was going to say, I wanted to make kind of an interesting and maybe, I don't want to say contrarian, but kind of an unusual comment. I've been working in the DEI space for the last 6.5 years or so. And certainly the combination of, the murder of George Floyd last year and the kind of the disparities that have been highlighted by the pandemic has created a gigantic boom in that space. But there are two things that concern me about it. One of them is the fact that it's just exploded. I mean, it's exploded to the point where there are so many people now that if I were a leader and I was trying to figure out what to do and with whom to do it, it would be challenging. And right now it feels very much like a bubble. And I suspect that there's going to be a kind of a falling out and a consolidation in years to come. But the other thing that I worry a little bit about is that, and I shouldn't say that I worry about it, but something that I've observed is that race has dominated the conversation. And in a way, I think it's been good to hear people talk about intersectionality. And this is, of course, when you talk about LGBTQ+, it's a crucial element not to get lost in the conversation. And I think that for some time, there was just like so much volume about race that a lot of the other dimensions of diversity were being, if not ignored, at least downplayed. And so I think that from the point of view of that specific industry, which has become a booming, and I'll be very curious to see people still talk about $8 billion a year. I think it's a number that has been thrown around for a number of years. I suspect that when the dust settles and we look back, that number has probably grown monumentally in the last year. But I'll be very curious to see how it falls out in terms of really acknowledging the importance of taking into account all sides of diversity and more importantly, intersectionality.
I think systematically, when I look at how industries are changing, like I look at where the VC dollars are going, right? And half of all VC dollars are being invested into 3 areas: AI/ML, fintech, and healthcare life sciences. So protein folding, you're looking at like new financial products and new banks like Chime, and then like you're looking at AI/ML, which is across all verticals, right? And one thing that I'm seeing in the marketplace is that, especially among founders, it's clear that like VCs will fund great ideas they think that will make them money. Not every startup looks like a tech company or a VC fundable company. And often underrepresented groups and folks who come from different backgrounds, right? Like maybe not classic like MBAs, PhDs, they're often very creative. And one of my mentors, Chip, started a hospitality company out of like motels basically and turned it into a huge business, and eventually went on to be the like adult supervision, as I like to call it, for Airbnb. So often it comes from a place of creativity, and it's not the VC funded model that you see tech companies. So I think like within the VC funding model, the VCs I talk to who are, let's say, not LGBT or underrepresented, they just tell me, look, I want to fund the best ideas out there that are going to make the most money. And that leaves a whole group out of the fold. What that means is like someone who's starting a hair products company, or someone that's starting a small business, or someone who's starting a charity like me. My first company was actually a charity, not a tech business, not a VC fundable business. It doesn't fit into that demographic. So sometimes it's not all about how much money we make, but the experience we create for other people and the piece of the market that we carve out for ourselves. Now, I think like systematically also, as industries change, people are going to be out of work, right? Like one thing people might not be thinking about, everyone has the example of like truck drivers or taxi drivers. What about engineers? What about designers? What about architects? I mean, as artificial intelligence develops, these are industries that are going to be highly impacted. And people aren't talking about like work that actually takes a high level of education that are going to be displaced. So I think it comes down to like, one, we have to continue to educate ourselves and keep a growth mindset. Be very aware that the technologies that are developing are going to displace large swaths of the population, and only the most educated and most entrepreneurial will survive that. And then we have to come up with new social systems to actually take care of the rest of the population that will not have work.
Yeah, it's such a great point, Ari. I mean, we talk about intersectionality, race, gender, location, LGBTQ identity, all of these different things intersect with our education, our socioeconomic status, the work that we do, the companies that we found or that we work for. And that's all stuff that's changing over time, especially as technology evolves. So we can't simply be, doing that work or talking about that work with one lens. We have to be talking about the whole people behind the organizations. Nee, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say before I have to hop to another call, and again, my regrets, but amen to everything that's been said. I have a great respect for the work that Paolo is doing in the DEI space, and everything that Ari just shared in terms of where VC dollars are flowing and where the opportunity is. But also I just want to put a finer point on the need for us to make a distinction between the motivation for our work, the outcomes of our work, not just through an equality lens, but through an equity lens. And I think there's a knee jerk to offer everybody the same opportunity. And I think one of the lessons at this particular moment is offering all of us across industries, et cetera, is that when we apply an equity lens, that puts us on a different path. Everybody's not affected by the same issues equally. Some folks are affected disproportionately. I was just reading this morning that, here in DC, African Americans accounted for, over 90% of COVID deaths since June. Right. And so, COVID here at our nation's capital is not affecting everybody the same way. And so I just use that as an example, but, great respect, for the work that everyone here is doing. And I hope that we can all stay in touch.
Thanks, Nee. Glad to have you for, the period we did.
Thank you.
And really, really great point that actually leads to my next question. There was a report released in March of 2021 by the Trevor Project that cited that more than 1 in 3 employed LGBTQ youth experience workplace discrimination, with significantly greater rates reported by transgender and non-binary youth, particularly those of color, right? So to Nee's greater point around what issues, how do people get affected by these issues? I know we're seeing strides made, in investments in LGBTQ entrepreneurs, but do we think those strides will translate to things like education, like employment, for the queer community members that we serve?
Well, I'll take a stab at it in the sense that, and I want to echo in the work that I do. Again, we measuring inclusion. We have a way of basically asking people to share specific experiences that make them feel excluded. And we actually see a remarkably high incidence for people who identify as LGBTQ plus in the corporate world. And I've always felt that entrepreneurship is the engine of economy, and ultimately a lot of companies that are startups today will become the large companies of tomorrow. I'm not so optimistic that from that point of view, that having greater investment in LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs will necessarily make a change, or if it does, it will take a really long time. I'm not really sure about some of the other things. I think that certainly education and employment in general will benefit from that. And I think that probably one of the biggest benefits I would hope would be just having greater visibility. It's that old adage of saying, if you don't see somebody that's like you, it's very discouraging and you end up not being interested in a certain field. So one of the reasons why I think that StartOut is such an incredible organization is because by giving visibility, with the Pride Index and some of these other initiatives, to show the fact that in fact, not only are there it's a vibrant community, but it's one that is having an enormous economic impact. I think to me, the biggest impact is going to be in just showing the rest of the community that, hey, this can be done. And there are people like us. And I should say like you, I don't want to give the misimpression. I'm here as an advocate, but so I think it's phenomenal. I think it's great, but I think it will be indirect and it's going to take a lot of work, and we cannot let down our guard collectively to make sure that just because we're seeing good results in one part of the economy, we don't want to suddenly feel like, oh, okay, well, this is great and it's going to fix itself in 10 years.
I agree. And I think the root of the question, I'll share a personal story, right? I've shared this on StartOut calls before, but when I started my career, I went into financial services. I experienced discrimination in Redwood City, California. The gay slurs that were being said on the sales floor at this financial company, I wouldn't repeat. And the personal slurs that were said to me by my mentors that I shared all the way to the president of the company, and actually outed myself from literally for the first time because of how disgraceful they were, definitely affected me. Now, there's this like victim mentality versus player mentality that I like to go to, right? When I experienced it, I had the privilege of standing up and saying, hey, this is wrong. And there are a lot of people that might not be able to do that, whether that's because they come from an immigrant background, visa issues, financial issues, and not everyone has the emotional safety net to be able to go do that. And there's privilege to be saying, I stood up and raised my hand because I didn't give a fuck, right? Like, fire me. I'm not trying to open a lawsuit here, but I want things to change for the better. Now, fast forward 15 years, 10 startup companies, and now joining one of the world's biggest companies. The nice thing that I can say is, like, when I raised my hand and said, hey, why are we're serving a bunch of different underrepresented groups, and especially founders, but we're not serving the LGBT community. why aren't we doing that? They said, well, there's no reason. We just don't have any data. And so like Paolo said, the Pride Index offered enough data that said like, hey, we should be serving the LGBT entrepreneurial community better, giving them time, resources, credits, access to our BDs, access to mentors. And I'm really proud of the work AWS has done in the last year that I've been able to spearhead, because I just raised my hand and said, hey, we could be doing better. And I will say, it doesn't matter what people's backgrounds were, whether they were straight allies or come from other underrepresented groups. Everyone in the organization has helped with this. I mean, I'm so proud to say hundreds of people have touched this partnership from AWS. And I think like, if I was going to inspire folks, like I came from a company where I was part of the founding team. I was employee one, I merged another company in, and I was able to, my first hire was a trans entrepreneur who was our videographer. We definitely hired underrepresented groups very early at our company. And that's going to create disproportionate wealth for those folks, right? Your first $1 million is really difficult. It took me 10 startups to hit that, right? And a lot of debt and a lot of hardship. But I'm very proud to say some of the people that were early employees at my last company definitely benefited from being brought in early, getting equity, and being involved in the process. And now they're going to be able to bring in the next generation. So I think that is the joy of being able to join a big company or start a company. You get to really define culture yourself through your actions and bring up that player mentality.
Great words of wisdom from you both. Well, I'm cognizant of the time. I know we want to leave time for some juicy Q&A, but I'll at least ask you this question before we move on to that. Curious what your predictions are for entrepreneurship in 2022. That could be an industry specific prediction, that could be a product specific prediction, but would love to hear what you're seeing in the year ahead.
I mean, I'm putting on my artificial intelligence and machine learning hat right now. That's the world I'm playing in. And I wouldn't be playing. Is that the same
hat that you put on before?
No, this is that hat, right? I can't keep it on. I can't hear y'all. All right, we'll finish out with this hat on, right? Putting on my LGBT and AI ML hat on, right? I think one of the cool things about this area is that it's just gobbling the marketplace. I'm going to predict that funding is going to increase by 50%, and it increased like 25 to 50% last year. And it's really gobbling up industries. We're seeing more billion-dollar companies come out of artificial intelligence startups. And I'll say for the folks that are on the call, pick a hot market when you're joining the entrepreneurial community. If you don't have a good idea, join a team very early or right before IPO that will actually give you experience in that market and just contribute. You don't have to be the founder to get a ton of experience and create wealth and bring people in. You can also be an early employee or a late employee of a late stage startup.
That's such a great point. We often talk about entrepreneurship in the context of, this one visionary founder who, brought something to fruition. And that's a great path, but it's not everybody's path in entrepreneurship or small business either. There's a lot of different roles that you can play. Paolo, I can see you thinking hard about your predictions. I'd love to hear.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking I'm also a serial entrepreneur. In fact, right now I'm kind of a parallel entrepreneur. I've not had any of the kinds of exits that Ari's had. Congratulations, that's very impressive. And right now I was thinking, I'm so deep into being an entrepreneur that I feel like I don't have a very good view of entrepreneurship as a whole. And I think that trying to, take a guess as to what predictions might happen would be maybe a little bit unwise. I mean, I can tell you that on the nonprofit side, we're doing a lot of work. In fact, we're still working with the Kaufman Foundation. We worked with the Minority Business Development Agency. I have a concern that there had been a trend, a very, very concerning trend over the last decade or so of entrepreneurship becoming increasingly homogeneous and increasingly a privileged activity. And I'm optimistic that from that perspective, there has been a very positive side effect of some of the disparities that we're seeing and the inequities that we've seen, that there has been a dramatic increase in the awareness at the entrepreneurial level. I've talked to a bunch of accelerators, a bunch of incubators, VC firms that are all realizing that it's like, hey, this is not just about doing the right thing. It's also the right thing to do. It's also the right thing to do from a business perspective. And so I'm optimistic that there will be a dramatic increase, I hope, in in the way that funding is going to go, and not for the wrong reasons, but really for the right reasons.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Well, let's move on to some Q&A. We've got a question from Amanda, who's attending. She said, what are the best ways to get in front of your market? Mine is LGBTQ plus folks during these current times. Social media, in my experience, has been very slow growth, so I'd love more ideas.
That's the $1 million question, or the $1 billion question, right? I don't know. I feel like Ari is probably much better equipped to answer this one than I am.
I mean, luckily during Weights and Biases, everything was still in person. I literally switched to AWS February 2020. So you can imagine the Amazon engine just feeds you folks to talk to. There's a ton of data on the folks in artificial intelligence who are starting companies. And I have unlimited companies to talk to at this point, and just one of me serving 13,000 companies. So it's really, on my end, a privilege to be able to say, I don't have enough time to talk to everyone, so I look for the hottest companies and disproportionately give my time to underrepresented founders. From a startup, like putting on my startup hat, I like to say, like, go to areas that are kind of out of the norm. Go live your values and meet people in an authentic way. I mean, I've sat and picnic benches with Chip and famous founders. I've observed Sergey Brin and Elon Musk having a chat over a drink at a picnic table at the desert. So I like to say, go to places where it's like fun, where you're engaged, where you can bring your authentic self and you can meet people. I love going to gay ski weeks as an investor. I meet my founders by hosting dinners and just friends of friends. So meeting people in any kind of activity where you're engaged, bringing your full self. And then from an industry perspective, I mean, it's always the conferences, right? But with Zoom and online conferences, how do you do that? You have to be very tactical, direct, very forward outreach, saying, here is your problem. I've developed this solution. I'm credible because of A, B, and C. Can I have 15 minutes of your time? The more direct you can be and highlight the problem that you're solving for the person, the more they're going to take you seriously. And with cold outreach, I was getting 10% conversions among tens of thousands of AI folks that I was reaching out to. So you can see very high conversion rates, but you have to use a variety of messages and media and case studies and blogs to make your case and justify that that person should be spending time with you.
Yeah, that's great advice. And we've got another question we'll ask, but before we do, Amanda, I'll just also give a plug. You know, Hello Alice, the organization I work for, serves more than 500,000 small business owners and entrepreneurs who are all on one online platform, sharing ideas with each other, sharing products with each other. You can also search for resources like, you know, grant applications, as well as search for other users by their expertise. So I think finding those spaces, to Ari's point, where you can get in front of like-minded people in addition to who might be your obvious clients, are also, you know, it doesn't always feel like the most direct way, but it can be something that's just as important in tandem, because that's where you're creating access to kind of other communities, as well as other knowledge and other expertise that you might not have. So I think exploring ways to reach like-minded folks as well as your customers directly is always important. All right, moving on to some other awesome questions. Someone asked, Deconstruction Arts, I don't know what your name is, but very, very cool profile name. How do you find the nonprofits that you choose to align with? This is a great question. I know I have some biases as a social worker by trade and a social service professional my whole career, but I will start with Ari and Paolo on this one.
You know, I'll tell you one thing. It's, I mean, there is just so much noise, and there are no like really good directories. I mean, you can go to ProPublica, you can go to, you know, kind of the usual places. But one thing that I found works really well is that if there's an area that you're passionate about, look for foundations, look for organizations like Echoing Green that give out fellowships, and look to see who they founded, because they tend to do a lot of the legwork for you, and they tend to, you know, if you take somebody like Echoing Green, every year they get, in fact, they just opened up their new competition this year, and every year they get thousands and thousands of applicants, and then they go through the process of, you know, kind of weeding through them, et cetera. And I found that that's a very good way to get at least nonprofits that have been vetted to the point where you feel that your alignment could be very good. Conferences, actually, I run a conference called the Diversity and Inclusion Research Conference, and in fact, StartOut has been part of that. And we support some small nonprofits, and we're going to be showcasing some in November on that. So conferences, foundation pages, maybe accelerators and incubators that focus on social impact, like Techstars, Equitech, and some of those.
Great, Ari, what are your thoughts?
You know, when I got started in entrepreneurship, it was during the No on 8 campaign, fighting for marriage equality. And I was trying to give my time as a young person to a bunch of charities. Equality California was one. They're like, oh, silly 22-year-old, you should just work the phone bank. I'm like, I'm a boss. Why are you just like subjugating me to this very narrow role because I don't have experience? So I just started a charity and raised $500,000 for that cause, among other local, state, and national causes, and kind of proved myself that I deserve a seat at the table and leverage that to get into technology. So I don't think you're going to be able to always find a charity that meets your needs that's actually in existence. I'm an entrepreneur, so if you find something that you want to give your time to, go start it. That's kind of what I lean into. And StartOut is probably the first charity that I've like this, and a couple different charities now in Bolinas that I love giving my time to, that resonate with my values, right? Giving is very like a beautiful value, but you have to find causes that very much speak to your core and that bring out your full self. I know that's ambiguous, but hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, and if I could just add a parting thought on that, and we'll start to unfortunately wrap up. I would say, you know, the charities and the nonprofit organizations that inspire me most are the ones who, by definition, want to put themselves out of business. There's a specific problem they're trying to solve, and they want to solve that problem so effectively that they should cease to exist. They want to live in a world where their philanthropy is not needed. And I think something that's not often acknowledged is that philanthropy is its own industry, right? And has its own influences. So when you're looking for nonprofits to give back to or to partner with, look for the ones that have a very clear impact purpose, right? This is the problem we're trying to solve, and here's the most effective way we think we can solve it. And here's where you or your business or your expertise can come in to help us. As opposed to, you know, charity for the sake of charity. I think it can be easy to get caught up in causes that make us feel good, right? So with that, I wanna switch gears a little bit and thoroughly thank Ari and Paolo and Nee, who's no longer here with us. I'd love to give you guys a chance to give parting thoughts to this awesome group of attendees. Anything you want to share or add before we sign off on LGBTQ entrepreneurship trends, or just more broadly a message you want to share?
There's never been a richer time to get involved in entrepreneurship. Whether you're a founder or you join as an early stage employee, I'm going to give you a secret. Every founder needs employees, right? You can't build a business without people. So find an area you're passionate about, get involved. If you don't have the necessary experience, find a way around that. Like there's literally endless opportunity in entrepreneurship to both generate wealth and eventually become the investor and give back as an ecosystem partner. But to start just as an employee or a founder and go solve a real problem that you're passionate about. That's the core of all this. So hopefully we'll see more of you involved.
And I'm going to send a message to those who are not members of the LGBTQ plus community. It is so crucial. It is so crucial that we learn to acknowledge that our privilege hurts other people, and that until we acknowledge that and we start to do something about it, until we actually roll up our sleeves and do the work to fix the problems that we're creating, things are not going to change. So if you happen to be an advocate like me or an ally, please, please, please do everything that you can. You have a voice, you have a power, you have a privilege that other people don't have. Use it. It's a superpower, and make sure that you use it right.
Thank you, Paolo and Ari, really wise words. Really grateful to talk to you today. Thanks again to StartOut for hosting this session, and to all those who attended and are watching the recording, and hope you enjoy the rest of the Equity Summit.